Chapter 1. Genre. Have you ever played that desert island game? There are different iterations, but you always have to pick a certain number of your favorite books or movies or songs that you would take with you if you were stranded alone on an island. So let's play together. Pick your 5 favorite books that you would take with you if you were stranded on a desert island. Got them? Okay, now take away 2 of them. Which 3 would you keep? You know what's coming, right? Take away 2 more. What is the one book you can't live without? It's hard to choose just one. This is the same problem most of us run into when it's time to pick the story we are going to tell. When I first started working with Shawn, I had so many ideas for the story I wanted to write. I wanted to tell a story with elements of crime and romance and war. I wanted big sweeping tales with a vast cast of characters. While some stories have all these things, you must pick one of these ideas that is the true focus of your story. On my first call with Shawn, I started talking about all the things I wanted to write about. However, when I turned in a scene for him to read, it became clear I didn't understand what the story was about or where I was going with it. This is when Shawn introduced me to an accurate definition of genre. If we ask most writers about genre, me included at the time, they might say things like fantasy, romance, mystery, steampunk, thriller, etc. But what does any of this actually mean? If someone tells us they're writing a fantasy story, what do we know about the story? We might get an idea of the setting, but we know nothing about what is happening in the story. What problems do the characters face? What do they want or need? Saying we are writing a fantasy story doesn't answer these questions because fantasy isn't what the story is about. Inside of StoryGrid, genre has a specific meaning. There are 12 content genres. They are either external, action, horror, crime, western or eastern, war, thriller, society, love, or performance, or internal, worldview, morality, or status. When we dig a little deeper, we notice the word genre is merely shorthand for something else. When an editor asks what genre you are writing in, they want to know what your story is about. What is the value of the story? What is the most important thing in your story? What kind of change happens in your story? Where are the characters at the beginning versus at the end of your story? Here's the kicker. Like the desert island game, you can only pick one for your story. Yes, our story can have elements of many genres, but one value should drive the story. Just like we can go on a road trip with a bunch of friends, but we shouldn't all have a hand in the steering wheel at the same time. Often during our calls, Shawn would let me ramble on, talking about all the different things I wanted to write about, but he would eventually bring me back to this question. What is your story about? What is the value at stake for the protagonist? Is our protagonist's life being threatened at every turn? We are writing in the action genre. Is our protagonist going to find love? We are writing a love story. This is the first thing our editor should talk to us about. Without knowing our genre, we don't know and will find it hard to explain what our story is about. We'll have no idea from scene to scene if we are on the right track. Our line-by-line prose could be masterful and beautiful, but ultimately the story will fall flat. Early on when I struggled to understand genre, Shawn introduced me to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow developed this model to understand human motivation. In real life, we focus on one of these layers at a time. If we don't have enough food or water, that becomes our number one concern above all else. But once we meet our physiological and safety needs, we have the mental space to focus on our friends and closest relationships, and so on. We can map the StoryGrid content genres on this hierarchy of basic human needs as well. For example, the action genre deals with life and death and therefore focuses on physiological needs. Love deals with love and hate and focuses on the need for belonging and love. Performance is focused on our need for esteem. Makes sense, right? When we choose our genre, we are identifying what our protagonist needs in their life throughout the story. This is what our character values the most. If they are stranded on a desert island with no food or water, it's clear both what the problem is and when they solve it. Our protagonist dies or lives. That's an action story. As we move up the hierarchy, the genres become squishier, and we move toward the internal genres that deal with internal conflict. In a worldview story, we're now talking about self-actualization, and the end goal is more subtle. Another way to think about genre is to ask the question, what does our protagonist want and need throughout the story? We call this the object of desire. Toward the bottom of Maslow's pyramid, our story is about our character's conscious want, survival, or safety. As we move up the pyramid, It becomes more about our character's unconscious need. However, in all these areas, we focus on one need, one value, one genre. Choosing a genre keeps us from getting off track while we write. Our genre becomes our beacon, always pointing us in the right direction. Genre also makes it easier to have a conversation about our story. Instead of a loose idea of, is this working? We can have a discussion with our editor around the value at stake in our story. This makes a huge difference. Even if our scene is beautifully written, if it doesn't fit in our genre, it doesn't fit in our story. Genre is the first word in our new story language and toolbox. It's the first tool we come back to over and over. What is the genre? What need is most important to our protagonist? Genre is important, but it is macro. It's the high-level view of our story. Next, we must dive into what we need in our story to make sure it meets reader expectations for our genre.